What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me are my two great co-hosts, Ralph Hannah, Maria Britos. And guys, here we are. It's the first day of autumn for here in the Northern Hemisphere. In Paraguay, it's the first day of spring. So obviously, we're getting really close to the end of the year. We only got a couple months left until it. But of course, this doesn't, of course, change the kind of drama that we've always been used to seeing in Paraguayan football. We saw a manager getting sacked, a new one coming in, a familiar face. We'll talk about who in just a bit. We'll talk about what's been going on with our Paraguayan players as we saw Miguel Miron play in the Champions League, the first Paraguayan in a long time to play in that competition. He was playing for Newcastle United against Milan. And we also have a Paraguayan being nominated for the Puskas Award, the best goal. Usually that's something that Paraguayans, they don't typically like to get nominated for any of those FIFA awards. But here we see a Paraguayan for the first time nominated for the best goal. It was Julio Enciso's goal against Manchester City last season that won goal of the season over there in the Premier League. And yeah, it's been nice to see at least some sort of change. But let's go straight into it. Let's go to Ralph because obviously aside from that as well, we're seeing the girls as well do very well in the national team as well. If you wanted to give more information on that.
Yeah. Hi guys, hi everybody. Yeah, I mean it's hard to have positive news about the Paraguayan national teams at the moment, as I wasn't on the last podcast, but you guys basically said everything I was thinking as well, and how we've been struggling in the men's senior team. But we got some good news happening. They're playing something called the Liga Evolucion at the moment down in Uruguay, which is CONMEBOL organizes an under-19s tournament to promote women's football. And the Paraguay under-19s have actually won their first three games. They beat Argentina 2-1, Ecuador 3-1, and then they smashed Bolivia 5-1 in the last game. So they're doing really well. And it's quite interesting. They've hired a coach from Brazil called Fabio Fukumoto. He used to work at a very big team in Brazil, Ferroviaria, where Fanny Gauto played for a time. So he's got a lot of experience, and it's interesting for me because I get the feeling he could be the next senior national team manager for the women's team. I have this feeling maybe they're going to try and build him up into that role if he does well, and he's got off to a great start because I think anytime Paraguay beats Argentina at any level, that's a good sign that we're doing things well. So that's some positive news to start off with.
Yeah, definitely some positive news, and going to Maria in here as well, because I think we're just going to go jump in this discussion real quick about what's been going on in the national team, because of course we saw a national team change. And for you, I mean, this is something that, you've kind of advocated for quite some time, because we've had managers in the past who managed in Paraguay who maybe weren't familiar. We saw that with Guillermo Barros Schelotto, Eduardo Berizzo. Now comes Daniel Garnero, and just your quick thoughts on that, just the appointment, especially someone that we've been accustomed to seeing as manager of Libertad, Olimpia, Guarani, and Sudamérica.
No, yeah, I think this selection, with Daniel Garnero, was definitely, I think, a little bit surprising, I want to say, but also not surprising in a way. Mainly because he's been surprising because out of all the candidates, I think that he was kind of he was already coaching Libertad, so you kind of didn't expect that. But then also not surprising because he is a top candidate, and he's a good coach in a way. He's been winning a lot of trophies with Libertad, and he's been doing pretty well in Paraguay. Taking away from his press conference, which Ralph did a great a summary of everything that he said. The main point that I saw and that I really liked to hear was that he knew that there was a lack of confidence in the players in the national team. So he said that there's definitely going to be some work in this feeling, in this pride. He's going to talk to the players. Like Rob said, he didn't say directly towards the captain or towards Almiron, but he did say that there's been some lack of self-confidence in the whole team and in some players. So yeah, I really like that he did mention that. Am I completely satisfied the fact that he's not from Paraguay? No, but I am a little happier because he is familiar with Paraguay. He did say, I know the culture, I know the people here, I know what they want. So he's aware of the situation. He knows, he's seen it, personally, what people from Paraguay want, and the main thing he said the goal is to go to the World Cup. So that was, he is on point in what the federation wants of him and what the national team wants of him, what the country wants of him. So at least he's aware of this, what the expectations are. There's a lot on his plate, I think, but I think I have confidence in him. I am a little, I guess lost a little bit of hope, in the national team, but with this sack this early, I think it was the right decision from the federation to do so, because it was already time to get rid of Schelotto and find a better alternative. Paraguay cannot miss this World Cup this time around, and that's, I think, the pressure that everyone feels. So with Garnero, he is a winning coach. Like I said, he knows the players as well. He has experience, almost 10 years already in the country. He has experience in other big clubs as well. So I am excited about this. Let's see. It's gonna be a tough, first national team match with against Argentina. So we'll see how that goes. I don't expect a win for that. Hopefully maybe a draw. A loss will probably not annoy me either, but a win for Bolivia will be really expected. So yeah, I'm excited. We'll see what happens with this time around. It's very early in the qualifications, but we are desperate.
Yes, we are. Yeah, just for those that don't know who Daniel Garnero is, obviously this is a manager, as we had pointed out, who had managed in Paraguay from Argentina. He had managed 4 clubs already since 2015, so he's been there. He's been around the block for about 8 years. He managed Escuela America for a year. Then he went to go in Guarani, where he was able to, in his 3 seasons actually in a row, finish first, second, and third place. Then he goes to Olympia in 2018, where he had his most success per se, where he won 4 straight league titles. From 2018 to 2019, he finished off second place before moving on and getting sacked. Where he then goes to Libertad and he also becomes successful. He wins 3 titles over there in his first 6 seasons so far. Of course, at Libertad, they are currently still top of the table, so it could have been another title for him if he had been to stay. But yeah, this is a manager who's obviously been very successful in the Paraguayan game. The big, of course, doubt, Ralph, and I think you've always been critical of him as well, and we'll talk about what he said in that press conference in a bit, is also what he does on an international stage, because one thing is taking on Paraguayan players, but the other thing is also what's been going on in the national team on the international level. He doesn't have as much success. The most he's ever gotten was a semifinal in the Sudamericana, but until then, he's either been eliminated either in the group stages or in the round of 16, or the quarterfinals. So it's been kind of a weird season. It's been a weird time for him as well. But like Ralph, Maria has said, I think this is the right manager that has obviously know what it's like managing in clubs in Paraguay, knows the Paraguayan players. He's actually given the debuts and managed a lot of these players who've been on the national team for the last year. But why don't you just give a bit more thoughts about this and also about what he also said in that press conference yesterday at Ipanema?
Yeah. I mean, I think about Garnero, the point you just touched on about the international games. And so the big question about Garnero is he's been there for a long time. Like you said, he's been successful for a long time. Paraguay have needed a manager for a long time in the Harrison era. So when Osorio left, they got Berizzo. When Berizzo wasn't going to cut it, they got Guillermo Barros Schelotto. And now they've turned to Garnero. So one of the questions is, Why now and why not before? And that's clearly because, especially from Justo Villar, he's the president of he's like the sporting director for the national team. I think there's been doubts over him. I mean, we have to be honest. There has to be a reason why Paraguay never went for Garnero in the last few years when they could have got him, because he's been there the whole time, and I'm sure he's always been willing to take this challenge. He was very clear about that in the press conference. They had no doubts about taking this challenge, moving from a very comfortable job where you're doing very well with Libertad and you have the best squad in the country, to going to a team that's really struggling like Paraguay are, having not scored a goal in their first 2 games. So there's one of those that question mark existed for the Paraguay national team, the selectors, and I think it is about those international games. And there's something he said in the press conference, just to link to that, when somebody asked him about set pieces, and the Paraguay traditionally have done very well, heading the ball and physically, and he was quite clear. He said the game has changed. He said that the football has moved on. Since when Paraguay used to do that, football was a different game. He said, I'm not going to sit there and be telling them to throw crosses in the box and hoping to score. So that's already, we can be sure that he's not going to try and play a different style to what we saw at Libertad. So at Libertad is it's the ball on the floor, it's in transition, is trying to be very quick. And that's another thing he also said. He said he doesn't like the local league is too slow. He says the quality of the referees and the quality of the pitches have made the game very slow, and he wants his team to play faster. So that immediately tells us what he's going to try and do, and he has a very clear idea of how to play. Can he transmit that to everybody quick enough? Well, you made a good point, Roberto, right? Julio Enciso's not here right now, he's injured, but he gave Enciso his debut, he gave Diego Gomez his debut, he gave Enzo Gonzalez his debut. He will probably call up Tito Villalba, who's played under him. So all of a sudden, you have many players that know him very well will be there in the squad. So that could help in terms of transmitting his idea and trying to get things working quickly. But then the question is, are you going to try and go to the world champions in their backyard and play toe-to-toe? Because you might get beaten very heavily. And that's unfortunately what we've seen with him. He has tried against Brazilian teams, for example, to go toe-to-toe in Libertadores or Sudamericana. And sometimes they give them a good game, and sometimes they throw away leads and they throw away games. And so that's the big question mark over Garnero it's not if he's tactically astute enough. I think it's if he is willing to forego some of his philosophy in those games and look at the limits of his team. And that's a really important thing when I say the limits of the team, because he's going from managing Olimpia when he had them were the best team. They were signing like Adebayor and players. Remember, that's when Olimpia had all the money. Olimpia got into issues with their chairman, Trovato, and he goes to Libertad, and Libertad then had all the money because Cartes had returned from being president in politics, so he was able to build the best team. In fact, he took many players from Olimpia to Libertad, right? So he's always had the strongest sides to be able to play those tactics. Now he's going into a World Cup qualifiers where, if we're honest, on paper, Paraguay are not the strongest side. They're probably around 6th or 7th strongest side. So they're going to play teams that are better than them quite, I would say, almost constantly. And so that's a big question mark of, can he adapt sufficiently to be able to handle that? And I guess the big test is, it's in less than a month. It's less than a month we're going to see it against Argentina. But I also share Maria's thoughts that I don't think we should really judge him on the Argentina game. The key thing is the Bolivia game. They have to win, and they have to win well at home to Bolivia, and to really get the qualifiers started, because that's something that Berizzo didn't do last time, and that put us in a whole bunch of trouble, because we'd also drawn at home to Peru when we're in that same position now. So I think the Bolivia game is key in how he takes on that match.
I think, I agree with that. And I think something that is important to know as well is that he only has 20 days between now and his hiring as manager and his first game. So there's really no time for him to really acquire everything and all of the players to put everything together for his first match. So there's really some kind of grace period for him to be able to get everything in touch. So we will have to wait and see how long it takes for him to get all this team together. And I also like the fact that he does know the players as well, like you said, Ralph. I forgot to mention that, and I think that that's essential because when Schelotto came here, he was kind of blindsided. He didn't know much. He didn't see. He hadn't met the players before, so Garnero knows everyone and he knows the federation as well. So it was just a matter of time, like you said, Ralph, for him to be hired. And yeah, I mean, I don't know why there was a lack of confidence because where was the lack of confidence when they hired Schelotto or the other managers from other countries? You know what I'm saying? Like, why take so much time to hire Garnero when they knew he could do a well job, versus hiring someone completely blindsided and then not knowing how they're gonna take on the national team. So we'll see. I have a feeling that this is gonna be a good hiring as well.
Yeah, this is obviously, like you said, there is no time. Like in this time around, like 2 weeks from now, we're probably going to find out our first players that are going to get called up. It's also a new slate as well, because there have been some players who weren't called up beforehand, like your Antonio Sanabrias or Alan Barreiros. But it's a good point of what Ralph said in that group, in that thread as well, that age doesn't matter, performance does. Does that mean another call up for someone like Oscar Cardoso, who is 40 years old? And, form is essential. What about someone like Alex Arce, who's playing in the second division in Argentina? You never know, and that's some of those things that are going to cause a bit of a debate. Like also Ralph had mentioned, Tito Villalba, someone who's been on the national team before but hasn't been called up in quite some time. Is he going to go in? So we just don't know what kind of team we're going to expect from Garnero. This is a new slate. We don't know what to expect in terms of players. So I mean, you would assume that the major names like your Almirons, your Gomez's, even an Enzo Gonzalez, someone like you said that gave him his debut. Possibly in this time, he's already playing in the Premier League at Wolves, so he might be someone that is already on the right form. But we just have to wait and see. I mean, I don't see this much of animosity in terms of like division in terms of other managers like beforehand, because this is obviously someone that's been around the block, has done it before, so it's not exactly someone that is going to have to deal with a bunch of issues. But again, it's right there, and then they couldn't come at a much more harder test than Argentina away, the world champions. I mean, look, if they get a result over there and full on not depend, but beat Bolivia over there in the Defensores, which will officially now move. Used to be in Ciales, now it's going to be at the Defensores again. So that changes a lot. And yeah, I mean, let's see what happens here. I mean, I just want to go on this last point as well, because this has been something that's been talking about when the sacking of Guillermo Barros Schelotto happened, was that Garnero was going to come in as an interim manager until the end of the year, and then in 2024 they would go and try to find someone. That isn't the case, Ralph. That he's going to be in here for the entire process. So this is clearly someone that they're going to fully trust along the way, regardless of what happens in the process. If they qualify or if they don't qualify.
Yeah, well, in theory, right? Of course, they could always fire him halfway through, but yeah, in theory, and that's a good point as well. I think when they got rid of Guillermo Barros Schelotto, the big issue was, who do you get? You're in the middle of qualifiers now. You should have done this before, right? Of course, that's with hindsight. If you were going to sack him after 2 games, you should have just got someone before the process, and you would have had more time. So in some ways it limited their options, and Garnero is there, and he was local. But there was this idea of, could he be interim so we can find somebody else? And I think part of that, and this is a really important point, I think part of that was, will Libertad let him go? Because his contract, he was actually about to renew his contract with Libertad. It was coming to an end. They're doing really well in the league. Horacio Cartes is a very influential person, and so he might not say, hey, you can't go, I don't want you to go. And then how do they really do anything there? the national team cannot pay Libertad for his extra for his services because Libertad don't need the money. So that's the point that Garnero said. He said that Cartes was very nice. He let him go. There were no problems. He wants to support the national team. And I think by having that kind of blessing to be able to leave, it also meant that they could just sign him full time. So they didn't have to mess around with the interim idea until his contract ran out with Libertad and then hire him. It might also, we don't know what went on in the negotiations, but it might also have been from Garnero himself, right? That he wasn't willing to come in as an interim, because when you win 8 titles in Paraguay, which is basically more than anybody has done, and especially with 3 clubs as well, you kind of have that credit, right? You have that value. And I'm sure Garnero knows his value to say, well, if you're going to hire me, it has to be full time. But just going back to this, I mean, really, even though whatever the contract length is, it's these 4 games this year are really key. We were saying it before with Barros Schelotto if he was going to continue, but it's the same now. It's like, whoa, we have to do something, or by 2024 you're almost out of the competition, or you're playing such catch up that even once Enciso is back, it's going to be so key. It might not be enough. So I think, yeah, I mean, whatever his contract length is, these 4 games become really key to what's going to happen and how he's received. And just one last thing, I think Maria said no division. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he's really well respected locally because he's won everything. So there's not really a journalist in the room that could say, oh, you should have got somebody else locally. There's no way. And there were difficulties bringing people in from abroad. And I think the only doubts will creep in is if he plays this very attacking style and tries to outplay teams that are clearly better than Paraguay, technically, like Brazil and Argentina. That's where maybe he'll get some criticism. Or if he starts playing people like Oscar Cardoso and Melgarejo and Villalba, like his players from Libertad, and they don't perform. That point about Cardoso is, I mean, he's the top scorer in the league at the moment. He was the top scorer in the league last year in the Apertura, I think. So, I mean, he on form, he really could be in there. And Paraguay do not have a striker at the moment. They're not scoring goals. So it's a real possibility, I think, that Cardoso gets called up.
And that would be insane. At 40 years old, you're seeing what Pablo Guerrero getting called up for Peru. Imagine him at 40 being called up as well. It would be, I mean, we all have our opinions, but again, like you said, we can't even score. So yeah, if he's able to do it, go for it as well. I just wanted to switch gears real quick as well, because obviously, aside from all this talk happening in the Paraguayan national team game, we also have the Clausura. Obviously the local league is still going on at the time of recording. Libertad are still top of the table with 23 points. Cerro Porteño in 17. Cerro Porteño, by the way, guys, they sacked Diego Gavilan, so he's no longer the manager of the team. There have been some talks about possibly going from someone abroad. There hasn't been anything official as of yet, but they are currently in second place. Resistencia, still surprising goal under Recalde, in third place. Guarani in fourth. Sportivo Emiliano with the manager that also a lot of people wanted to get, El Botellón, Humberto Garcia. There was also some debate saying that he should be the manager because he's obviously a name that is also doing well locally, especially being Paraguayan. He's there as well. Olimpia in sixth place under Chiqui Arce. Guaireña in seventh. Tacuarembó in eighth place. Nacional in ninth. General Caballero in 10th. Sportivo Trinidense in 11th and Luqueño in 12th. Looking at how the relegation goes at the minute, Resistencia and Tacuarembó are the only 2 sides in that kind of relegation zone in terms of the average. So they really need to pick up points if they're able to do that, especially Resistencia, given how good they've been so far in the league. Libertad are still in first for those points in the total accumulated points, even though they're top of the league. Cerro Porteño in second with 58 points. Imagine that. They have 58 point guys, and they haven't won the league. Probably won't even win the league. Sportivo Trinidense in third with 50 points. Currently in the would be the final spot for the Libertadores, so the 3 spots that go. And then you have the 4 teams in the Copa Sudamericana spots. You have Guarani with 50, Olimpia with 46, Sportivo Almeriano with 46, and then Nacional with 45. But then you have a huge gap of 9 points between 7 and 8 with Luqueño. So that final spot, Ralph, can change for the Copa Libertadores depending on what happens in the league. I mean, it's open for essentially what you have 5 teams separated by just 5 points. So that thing, if I'm a Trinidad fan, I would not be so sure of getting that final spot, even though for them, having been promoted, it would be a fantastic achievement for them to go all the way to the Libertadores next year.
Yeah, that's right. It's getting very close, but I think what you're starting to see is some momentum shift. So Trinidense, for example, since they lost Marcos Riveros, he's been injured. Their form is dropping. Olimpia won 4-0 and yesterday, right? No, wait, 2 days ago on Wednesday against Ameliano, and that suddenly puts them much closer than you think. They still have a game in hand. It's against Libertad, but if they were to win against Libertad, then they could be in second place and 5 points behind Libertad in the league, and then they start moving up in the rankings for Libertadores as well. So I think I would really keep an eye on Olimpia because, of course, Delis Gonzalez has come back from injury. So that's what I'm talking about, momentum shift. As you kind of have some teams dropping off, you have another one coming stronger. We just know what Chiqui Arce has done before. Like, this is how he sometimes he can be a bit slow to start, but once he builds the momentum with a team, it can be very hard to stop. And the other team that are very close, it's incredible to say, is Cerro, right? I mean, it was Diego Gavilan was sacked having lost only 1 game. It seems so strange, but in a way it made sense because they weren't winning games. They just kept drawing consecutively. And you couldn't really, unfortunately, you can really see like what Gavilan did really well with the reserve team to win the championship. That's why he was brought in. He just couldn't seem to replicate that. And some of the players he brought in from the reserves, some are starting and doing okay, like maybe Fabricio Peralta, but some just didn't really fit the bill, and actually they've dropped back down. So you kind of saw that struggle, and something wasn't quite clicking. So I think that's why he had to go. A friend of the pod, of course, Diego Gavilan, because we've interviewed him before. And so we'll see where Cerro go. If they get it right quickly, it might click. And then just finally, as I talk about the League Libertad, right? What happens to Libertad? Well, they've got Ariel Galeano as the coach, which is really interesting. Ariel Galeano, he became a first-team coach when he was like 27 or something, incredibly young. He's one of the youngest in the world. When he was down, I think, a Capiatá, Dos de Mayo. But he's been in Libertad in the youth teams for ages. So you talk about your Enciso, your Gonzalez, all these people. It was Ariel Galeano that was helping a lot of these through, along with Carlos Paredes, who he works with. But then what they did because those guys are very young, what they did is they put in club legend Patito Aquino, right? Sergio Aquino is one. Can't remember how many titles with Libertad, but he's going to be the assistant manager, and that I think brings that experience and also the respect from the players. Because how does 40-year-old Oscar Cardoso respond to someone who's much younger than him, Ariel Galeano? Is difficult, right? So I think Patito Aquino's in there to try and harmonize all of that. But let's see what happens. Maybe with Libertad, this then suddenly becomes very difficult for them.
Maria, I mean, look, now Garnero is gone. Libertad have been kind of the main force for quite some time, and they get someone who, again, they still have a good team, but there's still that question mark about the manager. So not just for Cerro, Olimpia, but for all the other teams, they can look at this opportunity and say, look, this guy's gone. We don't know what to expect from him, and they could probably change things. That's a big if, because these guys are still playing so well and they have the same team. So it's not going to be like a huge thing where it's like, oh, the manager's gone and they changed the entire squad. No, it's still the same team at the end of the day, but it could change. Still got a couple weeks left until the end, so maybe there could be a change at the top of the Clausura.
I was just gonna say that who was the replacement for in Libertad? So would this affect the top leaders of the table? Because we have Cerro Porteño who's creeping up up there. They have a new, and now they have suddenly a new coach. I mean, looking for a new coach. So there's so much change going on right now. It's like I feel like the table is gonna change suddenly. We might see Libertad at the top for a while, but who knows? The managing style can be different, and the players can not feel as comfortable, or who knows. But I feel like other teams might take advantage of the situation and be like, hey, let's give it our all and see what we can do. And especially I think the big teams, Cerro and Olimpia, that want to get there after a while of not winning in a competition in the Clausura or the Apertura. So yeah, I think this is definitely good for the other teams, not so good for Libertad. Obviously, we have to see how this new coach does. But yeah, definitely a crazy situation, like always in Paraguay.
It's been a week full of changes. We're gonna have to wait and see what happens as we move into the later stage of the month, heading into October. Then the qualifiers back again, guys. Can you believe it's already back? And we felt like we've just came back from it just a couple weeks ago, but it starts again in about 20 days with the game against Argentina in Buenos Aires, and we'll be here to talk about that and everything else going on Guarani Vision for another episode. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Maria Britos, and Ralph Hannah, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.